Hi, friends. Welcome back. We are in month 2. Hopefully, you've already gotten your kit and you're ready to start. Now, the good news is you pretty much know everything you need to know to complete month 2 of the Starry Night Van Gogh Design by Legit Kits. So, what I'm going to do is quickly review the process with you, and then I'll just walk through some of the pieces that might be a little tricky or might be a little different than what we have seen in the past. So here we go. Month 2, we are creating these bottom 2 blocks right here. So last week we created A1 and A2. This week we are creating B1 and B2. So it's going to look like this bottom portion right here. Again, blocks B1. B2 is going to go right under A1 and A2 that we created in month 1. You can see by the time we get to B2, we're starting to deal with a few more smaller pieces. Don't worry, we'll handle everything the same process as we always have. So everything we did last month in month 1, we're going to repeat for month 2. So I'm going to walk you through, kind of review, and I'm excited to get going. So thank you for joining me. Again, I'm Deb Atchison, Legit Kit Certified Instructor, and I run their Certified Instructor
some
program.
of the things
So
that
are you ready
we
to
learned
get
last
started?
week
I
that we're
am.
going to do prior to getting started to sewing our pieces.
So the first thing we're going to do is lay out all of our fabric, starch it all up, let it dry. And while you're doing that, you can cut apart your cut guide pages and put them in your alphabetizer if you want, or wait until you get the fabric and alphabetize them that way. And then we're also going to prepare our pattern pieces by cutting them apart and by folding them on all of the sew lines. So I'm going to just remind you how we do that. We're going to fold into, so we're going to fold the pattern onto itself. So letters are of the pieces of the segments are actually going to be touching each other. So you can use whatever tool you want to use to fold it. Some people use the tool, some people use the Don't Panic card. I like to use the edge of my Add a Quarter Plus ruler. It just makes a nice, sharp, crisp crease. You can do it manually, however you want to do it. Fold up all of your pattern pieces on every sew line. Now, I like to do this while my fabric is drying, just to save me a little bit of time and have something else to do while I'm waiting on that to dry. You don't have to fold them all to start. You could fold them when you get to each piece individually. But honestly, I like to know once I'm touching the pieces and the fabric, I'm just ready to sew. So I will often do this, sometimes sitting in front of the TV, or sometimes I've been known to take a little cutting mat and do this in the car as my husband's driving us to small group or someplace else. So go ahead, fold all of those pattern pieces on every sew line that's on each piece. And then we're going to file those away in our alphabetizer. So you may remember that I take my cut guide, my fabric piece, and I file it behind each letter of my alphabetizer. So here's my fabric for AC and my cut guide for AC, my fabric for AD, my cut guide for AD. So we're going to do that with all of our fabrics, all of our cut guides, and keep them in our alphabetizer. So once your pattern pieces have been folded on every single line, then you're going to look at each pattern piece and determine where is number 1. What color is piece number 1 going to be? Remember, we're sewing in order, 1, 2, 3. So we're going to start with number 1. So we're going to take number 1. It's FT. I'm going to go to my alphabetizer and place it behind the letter F. Same thing with this piece because number 1 is FL. And I just place them in there. You can see I already have some in place here. So here's the ones I just folded, each piece for each of these. Actually, this is in the wrong place. Look at that. I put it in the eyes. This is not correct because piece number 2 is I. So we always want to look at piece number 1. Piece number 1 is MU. So I'm going to raise up this M and stick it back there where it belongs. And let me see, did I get this one in the right place? I did. IA. Sometimes we get a little anxious, but it's always good to double check ourselves when we get to that piece. And same thing here. Number 1 is IA. So file all your starched fabric, your cut guides, and your pattern pieces behind the letter of the very first piece. And then you're ready to get sewing. As you may recall, I do things a little differently than some. I've learned through several years of teaching legit kits, especially beginning quilters doing legit kits for the first time, that pre-cutting your fabric can get a little bit confusing. Now, lots of people like to do it, and it's a great way to do it if you can make sure you're cutting enough fabric, you're cutting it at the right angles, all of those kinds of things. The light board definitely helps with that. But I have quit teaching that way because I find students were ripping out a lot of seams, and nobody wants to rip out a lot of seams. So, what we're going to do is the way I do it, the way I teach it, is how I'm going to show you to get through this block of the month. Now, I'll show you a few other tips and tricks along the way, but we're going to refresh what we did in month one. And then we're going to try something a little different together. We'll see how it works, or we'll see if it's going to be really confusing. All right, I'm going to come back to this piece. Normally, I start at the front of my alphabet and my alphabetizer, and the first letter that has any pattern piece in it is actually letter D. So we can jump all the way to letter D. But this has an example of something I want to try with you. We're just going to see how it goes. It might speed up our process, which would be really, really good. So we'll try that in just a moment. So I'm going to skip that and jump to the letter F. And when I look inside of letter F, I have this piece here that says FL, and I have this piece here that says FT. So let's start with FL, or is that FI? I don't know which one it is. Maybe FI, sapphire. And so I'm going to find this piece again, and I'm going to mark it off. And I told you in month one, I mark them off sometimes. Sometimes I don't. Well, guess what? Last week, I was doing a very important quilt, a little Hummer quilt for a very important situation. And I had accidentally covered up the fabric. It was bigger than my piece, and I forgot to trim one side. And so I ended up actually finding a mistake once my blocks were all sewn together that was very obvious. Now, my husband said he didn't see it, but this was an important quilt. It had to be fixed. So I had to take that block apart and fix it. And I think it turned out okay. Not as good as it would have been if I'd have done it correctly the first time. So now I'm an advocate of, if I would have marked off all those pieces and I would have still had that left in my alphabetizer at the end, I would have known, Deb, you missed a piece before I started putting it all together. So we're going to do that this time for sure. So block B2B, I'm going to find it on here. B2B, piece number 1 is what that means in parentheses. So I'm going to mark that off because we're going to do that. Now, what I've done in the past and what I showed you last week was, remember, piece 1 is kind of like the first child. They get treated special. They're the chosen one initially. Everything has to be perfect, all of those things. Same thing with this. Our first piece of each segment that we're doing needs to be stuck down to this fabric somehow, some way. I use roll-on, double-sided roll-on tape because it works really well. Some people like to use glue. As you know from last month, I'm not too great with glue because I forget to put the lid on and then I ruin all my glue. So I'm just going to put a tiny little dab of this in the seam allowance. It doesn't have to be a lot. Just a teeny tiny piece to secure it down. And then I'm just going to make sure I have a 1/4 of an inch. This is pretty much a 1/4 of an inch, so I can lay that down, and then I can see there's glue all around this piece of paper. So now I'm ready to cut it out. I've been teaching classes since last month, and I need to change my blade. So I will do that here in a moment on a break. So it's stuck down with my tape that I put on there. It's ready to then be filed behind number 2. So I'm going to flip over. I'm going to turn that fabric over. I don't need it anymore. Go to my alphabetizer and put this behind the letter V. And when I get to the V fabric, then I'll take care of that piece. Okay. Let's go back to that piece in D and let's just try something. I want to try. We'll see how it works. It may work. It may not. It may be a bust, and I may need to edit this out of the video, but we'll see what happens. So piece 1 is DQ. So I'm going to flip to DQ. Reminds me of Dairy Queen. If you're in the South, could go for a Buster Bar right now, but we won't talk about that. So piece B2E, I'm going to find it here, B2E, piece number 1. That's what that parenthesis stands for. I'm going to cross that off. I'm still going to need this because there's still more pieces I have to cut out of this fabric. And now let's go ahead and jump to piece number 2, DZ. So I'm going to switch over here to DZ. That's going to be piece number 2, and it's B2E, piece number 2. So I'm going to mark that off. And now I'm done with those cut guides. I'm going to set this out of our way so I have plenty of room. Now, if you recall, last month we did piece 1, and then I had this lovely acronym, Tiny Little Stitches Indeed. And that kind of reminds us of the process we're using. So the T stands for trim, the L stands for line up, the S stands for sew, and the I stands for iron open. I'm going to try putting the first 2 pieces together. So here's the way that's going to work. We're going to see if it's going to work. I'm going to lay down piece number 2. So piece number 2 is DZ. I'm going to lay it down. And then I'm going to lay down piece number 1 on top of it, making sure the edges I'm going to line up with over here, are nice and straight. Then let's try it. Let's see what happens. I'm going to fold this on here. We'll line it up to this side. So the left and the bottom are nice and straight. I'm going to fold this on line 1. And piece number 1 is going to go on top, just like we did a while ago. We've got a 1/4 inch of a seam allowance right here. Piece number 2 is under it. And I know there's a lot of that DZ fabric around here, so I know this little piece is going to be covered. Now, instead of taping it together, I'm going to try and sew these 2 at the same time. So I don't have to cut piece 1 first. I can go ahead and do piece 1 and piece 2 at the same time. And this was a perfect example for me to try this with because DQ and DZ, same letter of the alphabet. So let's move to the sewing machine and see what happens. All right, here we are at the sewing machine. I've got about a 1/4 inch seam allowance there. I've got my piece all the way on the fabric underneath. I'm going to open it up and we're going to stitch straight down this line right here. And let's see what happens. All right, and I just stitched all the way off that page because I'm at the seam allowance and I started way up here in case anything tangles. So now these pieces are sewn together. This is DG. And if I open it up, DG is under piece 1. And if I open this up, DZ is under piece 2. So if I take this to my iron and I press this and iron this open, then I've done 2 pieces at once. It's working. So let me get my iron on. I forgot to turn it on. We'll press this. We can finger press it for now. We can see that's working, but I do want to kind of preset to get those little puckers out. All right. So DQ is here. And piece number 2 is DZ, and that's the fabric that is actually under piece number 2. So what I can do now is move back to my ironing board, iron it open, and then I can trim both of these pieces, and I've done 2 at once. It worked. Now, the problem is going to be when the 2 fabrics aren't in the same envelope, we are the same letter in our alphabetizer. It may make a hot mess. All right, so let's take a look at this and see how it worked. It worked. It's pretty cool. All right. So my first piece is DQ. So fabric DQ is under piece 1. Okay. My second piece is DZ, and this is my fabric DZ, and it's under piece 2. So basically what I did here is I just saved myself a little bit of time. Instead of putting on piece 1, trimming it down, filing it to number 2, and waiting till I got to it, I went ahead and took both of those pieces at the same time. I didn't have to tape anything down. I just sewed them together all at one time. And it actually worked out. So when I take this to my ironing board and I open it up and I press the seam, then I've got both of the pieces where they need to be. Piece 1 is DG. Piece 2 is this DZ fabric. So we've got everything right where it needs to go. We just saved a little bit of time. And in a process as long as legit kits, all the little bit of time we can save will be really helpful. So let me iron this open and let's trim it and see what we think. Oh, my iron is not heated up yet. So it's spitting out a little bit of water, but that will dry. No worries. Here's our piece. I can go ahead and trim DZ. Trim this guy away. We no longer need it. Okay. And then when we trim our piece number 2, remember we're always folding on the next seam allowance. And notice how I went all the way off here, just like I tell you guys to do. Go all the way off that page. So you may have to hold on to those seams and just pull that paper back just a little bit. It will pull back, keeping your seams intact and allow you to then fold on that next sew line. So you are always folding on the next line that you're going to sew on. So our next piece is going to be piece 3. So I'm always sewing piece 2 to piece 3. I've already sewn this line. So my next line is this one right here. So we're going to fold it here. This is where I like to use add a quarter ruler. And I'm going to trim this down and then just right off the end. All right. And this is exactly what that piece is supposed to look like. And we saved one little bitty step. Okay. We'd still do the same process if we did it last week, but this helps me. It saves me time from grabbing my tape, taping one piece on, trimming it down, and then filing it the next one. I was able to do the 2 pieces at one time. So DQ and DZ. All right, so let me file these pieces of fabric back away over here under D. And if you have questions about that, please leave a comment and I'll be happy to answer that for you. But I was thinking about it and I thought, I want to save time. I have a lot of these I need to make. I want to save as much time as possible. So this will help us save a little bit. So where do we file it next? We file it under C. So we're going to file it under C. My next piece I have to sew F, so FT. It's going to get a little confusing when we're digging in our alphabetizer for 2 pieces of fabric that don't match, but we could still do it. So I'm going to just see if it'd be easier for me to just do piece 1 and then throw this in M, or if it'd be better to do both at the same time. So I'm going to try and let's see. So I'm going to get my cut guide for FT and my fabric for FT. And I'm going to mark off this piece on my cut guide, which is BD1. So here it is down here at the bottom, BD1. I'm going to mark that off. Now, as you may remember, these cut guides kind of give us a guideline for where we cut our pieces out. But we don't worry about that the way I do things because I'm always starting at the bottom of the fabric and working up. So we're done with that. We can set that aside. I know this is going to be piece 1. So I'm going to put my piece right here so I can have it. Piece number 2 is going to be MU. So let me jump to the M's. Here's my MU fabric. And I'm going to mark this off the cut guide, which is B1D piece 2. So B1D piece 2. So I know I will have been finished with that piece. So this is the part that could kind of trip you up. You want to put your number 2 fabric, which is MU, down on your surface. So I'm putting it down on my Caterpillar light board. That's just what I use to cut on. I cut on my Claire mat on top of it. It's perfect. So I'm going to place that first. And then I'm going to place my fabric 1 on top. Kind of line it up as good as possible here on the corners. And then my fabric piece for number 1, I'm going to position somewhere. Okay. Actually, I think I like positioning it better where the sew line is next to the edge. So my sew line is right here. I've given myself about 1/4 of an inch. And you could pin it, you could tape it, you could glue it, whatever. I'm just going to hang on really tight and hope all goes well when I get to my sewing machine. So I'm going to grab up both pieces of fabric, hold this over, and slide over to my sewing machine. All right, so here we are at the machine. My piece is still about 1/4 of an edge from the edge. I'm making sure that this piece didn't slide up and go off of my fabric. I want to make sure I have fabric all the way under here, and I do. And I've got about 1/4 of an inch right here. So I'm going to open that little puppy up and stitch all the way down that line. 1/4 of an inch. Pieces all got fabric underneath it. And let's just stitch straight down that one. That's stitched. FT, my piece FT is on top. My MU is underneath it. So now let's take it to the ironing board and let's open it up and let's see if we did it right, which We did it right. All right, so I'm going to lay this pattern piece down. And then I'm going to press open. Remember the I stands for iron open. So I'll just set my seam and I'll do a little bit of press and get that nice and flat. And then now I'm ready to trim our cutting mat. Our pieces are correct. We know FT is under FT and MU is under MU. So now I can trim these pieces. I'm going to cut MU. I'm going to fold on the next sew line between 2 and 3. I'm going to fold there. Grab my ruler and trim that away. And then the rest of this, I've got seam allowance all around this piece, so I can just trim all of that completely off. And it doesn't have to be pretty. We're going to trim that later. And look, there's our piece, nice and neat. Both pieces, 1 and 2, already completed. So now I can file this behind NS because that's the next piece it's going to. All right, so if I get my alphabetizer, the piece goes behind NS. And now I got to put this fabric back. That's the only thing I think might slow down this process. I don't know if I'm going to like it because the other I can just go, but we'll see. So here's FT putting that back in place and MU, I'm going to put that back in its place. And then I'm just going to keep on going on that process. Okay, so that piece I just showed you doing 2 pieces at one time, that is only going to work on your first 2 pieces. Because look, if I do this piece and I try to do the same thing, this is really the line I would be sewing between those. I can't do that. So that's only going to work when we're doing pieces 1 and 2 at the same time. It's not going to work for 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. So only our first and second pieces are going to be able to be done that way. But hey, it saves us using tape or glue, and it gets one step kind of combined with the second. So good luck with that. Let me know how you like it. Have fun getting those pieces all put together. When you're looking at this piece, YE, and this piece B1A, that's the number 2 part for YE. I've marked that off, and guess what? There's not another piece on this cut guide. So once I'm finished with this, I'm done, and I can take it out of my alphabetizer, and I know I've completed everything with that piece of fabric. So if I get to the end and I still have fabric or still have a cut guide in my alphabetizer, that's a precaution to let me know, hey, take a look and see if you missed something on a piece. Okay, so once I'm done with this, I will no longer need to file it back in my alphabetizer. All right, if you're trying our new way of doing piece 1 and 2 at the same time, let me caution you about this. So this is piece 1A. Piece number 1 is IA, so I have that on top. Piece number 2 is YE, so I have that on the bottom. But I want to show you, if I fold this and put it across the bottom, it's going to be pretty tight across here. It'll make it, but it'll be pretty tight. So when you are lining these 2 up, you have a little bit more wiggle room if you line it up on the side of the pieces instead of at the bottom. So hopefully that helps. Okay, let's talk about an instance where this new little way of doing 2 pieces at a time might be a little bit confusing. So here I have piece number 1 is MU, it's on top, and piece number 2 is IA, that's on bottom. But if you notice, I've already cut from these, and so it's kind of, where am I going to line these up, to where I have a nice edge? So I thought, oh, I'm just going to come up here and do it at the top. So instead of trying to rearrange all this fabric down here at the bottom, I'm just going to go up here where I have a nice straight edge on both of these pieces, line up my cut line on the edge of that. Piece number 1 is touching piece number 1, MU, the fabric. So I can slide this over my machine and sew it, and it's going to be just right. So don't worry about it has to be at the bottom, especially if you got pieces like this. Or I could simply even turn this fabric this way, line it up right here, as long as I've got fabric under all of my pieces. So the other thing you need to be careful of is when you line this up, I've got this straight edge. This is between 1 and 2, right? But look, what fabric is touching MU? Not MU. MU is over here. So if I were to line it up this way and sew down that line, not going to work. I need to turn it to where MU, piece number 1, is touching piece number 1 fabric. So don't turn it where IU, or where IA is touching MU. Turn it to where MU is touching the MU fabric. So that might be a little bit confusing. If that's a little too much, I totally get it. Go back to just trimming piece 1 and then going on to piece 2 when you get to that letter in the alphabet. But I wanted to make sure I pointed that out because I didn't want you doing your pieces wrong and you get to the end of the block and some pieces are not where they need to be. So if you're doing 2 pieces at a time, make sure piece number 1 is touching piece number 1 fabric, not hanging off on the other side so that it would touch the piece underneath.
So you either
So
repeat
make
how we
sure
did it last
piece
month,
number
where
1
we do
fabric
one
is
piece
touching
at a
piece number
time
1, and then
that
you'll
I
be
showed
good to
you
go.
initially, or if you want to be brave and try doing 2 pieces at a time, go ahead and do that.
All right, so here's a little cautionary tale if you're going to try this, or if you tried it, if you didn't do what I did. I am so used to doing this just by muscle memory. I just take a piece, line it up on a straight edge, make sure there's fabric underneath, and go. Well, I actually made a mistake on 2 pieces. Not too bad given how many we did, but 2 pieces I had to rip seams out of, and I don't like to get out my seam ripper. So all because I'm just so used to picking up a piece, laying it down, and muscle memory lining it up on a straight edge. And I had to be careful making sure that whatever was under piece number 1 is the actual piece. The fabric actually covered that piece instead of getting these 2 pieces swapped. And I swapped them twice. I caught it as I was cutting them out, so that was good. But I would be careful trying that method, and just making sure that whatever piece you laid on the fabric, piece 1 was touching piece 1 fabric, and then you'll be okay. Once I started double checking myself and quit relying on muscle memory, then I was fine. So keep that in mind. But I kind of like it, but I kind of don't. I don't know. I'm kind of mixed. So we'll see what happens, what I do in month 3. But having gone through my alphabet just one time, I've already completed 5 pieces. And I think this was 8 or 9 pieces of fabric that I'm already done with and already pulled out the Alphabetizer. So these are done. I don't need them anymore. I can set them aside. And these 5 pieces are ready to be added to other pieces. So we actually got a lot more accomplished the first pass through the alphabet of our Alphabetizer than we have in the past. But again, I made 2 mistakes and had to rip them out. So double check your pieces if this is new to you, making sure that whatever color you have for piece 1 is on piece 1. And this is actually the piece I ripped out. You can tell because I had to tape it. So if you do have to tape your pattern piece back together, you can use matte Scotch tape. You can use freezer paper tape. They use like at the butcher store, or you can use just washi tape or washi dots and stick on there, and you can sew right through it, iron on it, no problem. All right. So let me know in the comments if you tried it and what you think. So I'm going to go finish the rest of my pieces, getting all of the other pieces added to it. If anything's tricky, I'll come back and let you know. All right, I'm on my second pass through the alphabet and I just got to the letter D. That's the first place I have any pattern pieces. So I'm looking at this piece and I'm thinking number 3 is DN. So I'm going to pull that and do that piece. And number 4 is M, but look ahead at number 5. Number 5 is DZ. And look, this line here that I would be sewing on between 1 and 5 does not touch this line over here. So I could sew number 3, jump to number 5 on the other side of the piece, and then file it away to do number 4 next. And it's not going to cause any problems. Now, if this was over here connected, then obviously we couldn't do that. But since these 2 sew lines are not going to intersect, I can get 2 pieces out of the letter D before I file it away and then have to come back to
the next time I'm running through the alphabet. So hopefully those little tips will help you out. Keep going. I'm still working over here. You keep going over there. Okay, I just can't help myself. I have to come on here because anytime I see points that are so perfect like this, I just get so super excited. I mean, look at that point. It's perfect. That's why I love foundation paper piecing, and that's why I love Legit. Their patterns are so well written and they just come out so perfect. I just love it. I hope you're finding perfection as you're sewing too. Okay, I finished my second pass all the way through my alphabetizer, through every letter, and look at all these pieces that are done. All these segments are done. And I only have 6 more segments to add individual pieces to, and then we'll be ready to put our blocks together. So keep going. Don't lose hope. You're getting closer to having all these segments done. All right, I made it through my third pass through my alphabetizer here, and I have 2 segments left. So 2 units that I have left to sew pieces on. This one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces, and this one has 2 pieces. So once I sew those, we'll be ready to put these 2 blocks together. Hope you are progressing just as well. All right, I finished my last 2 pieces and just look how pretty all those perfect little points are. So now all of my segments, all of my units are completed with all of the fabric on them. The next step is to put these pieces together. But before we do, if you have used your alphabetizer like I do, and you take things out when you're marked off all the pieces of fabric, this should be empty. But I was double checking mine and look what I found. Under D, I still had fabric. I've already set it aside, but I had a piece that was not marked off. And so I'm like, oh, did I skip a piece? Did a piece of fabric cover it up and I didn't see it? What's happening here? So I went back through my stack of all my completed pieces and I found the one that I had not crossed off, B2J. So here it is, B2J. And piece number 1 was done. Piece number 1 is on there. Oh, along with all these other threads. But piece number 1 is on here, but I did not cross it off. So that was probably one of those where I was doing 2 pieces at one time and just didn't cross it off. So the good news is I don't have anything that I messed up. It's all right here. It's all done. I'm ready to set this. All of my stack of unused fabric pieces and cut guide. All this stuff is done. Now, all we're going to need for the next section is that assembly guide. So now our next step will be to lay out all our pieces like this and then put our blocks together and then add those to month 1 and we will be done. So you get to pick and choose which block do you want to start with. If we look at B1, we've got 4 seams to sew. That's a pretty easy one to finish. I'm probably going to start with the easier one. But if you look at B2, there's 11 seams that we have to sew here. My friend Nina would probably start with this one because she likes to, as she calls it, she taught me the other day, sewing downhill, start with the hardest or the not necessarily hardest because it's all the same process, but start with the one with the more steps and work down to the easiest one. So when you get to the bottom of the hill, it's almost all done. So you pick which way you want to do that, and we'll set out these blocks and we'll sew our blocks together. All right, let's put these blocks together. I'm starting going up the hill. So I'm starting with the block with the fewer pieces to put together, or fewest pieces to put together. So I'm starting with B1A. So the first thing we do is we lay it out so it looks exactly like this. So B1A, B, E, C, D. And you want to make sure you can read all of your letters and numbers, that they're facing the correct way. If not, then you've got a piece turned the wrong way. So I know all of my pieces are laid out correctly. So I'm going to look at my instructions and they tell me to sew B to C. So we don't always start with A, then B, then C, then D. You got to read these very carefully. Or if you're more visual, you can look at this and see, oh, this is the line I'm sewing together first, which is the line between B and C. So these are my two pieces, B and C. And if you recall, last month we trimmed down all of our blocks before we put them together. So let's do that. I'm going to do that for B and C. And then I'm going to show you another way that we can also put our blocks together where we don't have to trim down the pieces. But the benefit to trimming down our pieces is that we can take advantage of these magic white lines that are right here. And we really like those. All right, so I'm going to put my 1/4 inch seam, my Quilter Select ruler here that's not going to slide. I'm going to put that on the 1/4 inch line and trim off any extra and do that all the way around. Instead of lining it up over here on the edge, I just always double check and line up with the 1/4 inch line on my ruler. And that works beautifully. And it really doesn't matter because you're really matching up points. But when we have our blocks trimmed down nice and neat, that's when we can take advantage of the magic white line. So I'm going to do that all the way around this piece. All right, so A1B is trimmed up. Now let's do the same thing to the piece we're going to match it to, which is C. In order for us to take advantage of those magic white lines, we have to have all of our pieces or the pieces we're connecting together. We have to have them trimmed down to that 1/4 inch seam allowance to be able to take advantage of those magic white lines. So that's what we're going to review right here. So both pieces are trimmed up. And again, if we look at our paper, B is on top and C is right underneath. So we are going to match these up. Now, don't freak out when you look and you're like, well, that looks good. But look, this is sticking out. Don't worry about that. When we fold them together, this point is actually going to meet that point. And you can see actually, if I put my ruler here, those points are going to meet up. These 2 points right here are going to meet up. Those are going to be crucial points because we got lots of pieces coming in together here. 3 pieces coming in together here. And we want that point to match that point perfectly. And then these 2 points down here on the end are going to match up once we put them together. Now, just like in sewing, we do right sides together. We're going to do right sides of our pieces together. So I always say pick them up and make them kiss. They're kissing each other. That's what we want. I was in a class last week and someone turned over their piece and then they turned over their piece and they're like, well, it doesn't match. Don't do it that way. Grab the pieces in the middle and make them kiss and then pick them up. And you know you've got the right sides together. All right, so I don't have my new little magic clips in yet. I showed those to you last time, so I'm going to use the bigger ones and my regular clips, but I do have some magic pins, and I started using these on the project I was working on before I started this, and I'm actually really loving them. I had them tucked away in a drawer, and it's time for them to come out. So the first thing I'm going to do is place a pin right here in this intersection that's in the middle because that's really important. And then turn it over and see, did you get that pin right in that corner? And if you did, yay, pat yourself on the back and you're ready to then poke it into this corner right here where all those 3 pieces come together. That's where those points are going to meet. So I'm going to poke it right in there. And when we look on the back, that pin should be coming out right on that line. Now, let me see, did I get it quite right? Yep, exactly. All right, so those 2 pieces are going to meet. Now, what's kind of cool about these magic pins, these are the ones that are for patchwork, I believe. So they're nice and flat. They can be ironed on. Your machine can actually go over this little handle. It's kind of nice. So I'm going to take just a little clip and pin it right here onto that pin, and that pin is sticking straight up. You can kind of see that there.
Well, it blends in with the line, but we want that exactly straight up, not bent to one side or another. And then we can continue putting pins the rest of the way down. Now, when I look at this end, here's what those magic white lines do. So when I'm looking at the magic white lines, the edge of this white line should meet the edge of the fabric underneath. This edge is going to meet the edge of the fabric that is underneath it. And if I turn that over, same thing. Magic white line touching the edge of the fabric, magic white line touching the edge of the fabric. So if you've got those lined up perfectly with those magic white lines touching the fabric underneath, you should be able to take a pen and put it right in that intersection where the two white lines meet. And it should come out, voila, on the intersection where the other two meet underneath. So perfect. And we're going to stick a clip there, making sure our pen is nice and straight. We don't want it angled. We don't want it pushing the fabric underneath it one way or another. And now, just because I'm a little maybe OCD or I want everything to be perfect, I'm going to stick another pin right here on the seam line right here and see, does it come out on the seam line? And it's just a tiny bit off. So if it's off, I can just actually can use my light board, and it helps me then to see where that line is underneath. Okay. I'll turn that down because it's easier for you guys to see me if I don't have it. But holding this over a light board then allows me to see where the shadow of that seam allowance is underneath. So then I can hold that pin straight and put a pin right there to hold that nice and snug. And I'm going to do the same thing all the way down here. So I'm going to start in the middle. I also saw this in class last week. Someone pinned their end piece here, but when they went to pin in the middle, somehow they had their pin crooked, and so they got a little tiny like a crease, not a bad crease. It wasn't anything they had to redo by any means. They were fine with it, but it made it a little bit harder. It wasn't perfect. Okay. So if you start in the middle and smooth your way out, then you can stick a pin in that seam allowance again and see, did it come out on the seam allowance underneath? And it did. So we're going to stick a clip to hold that in place. And then we're going to do the same thing at the end. Notice my white line is touching the fabric underneath, so it should be lined up pretty good. And if I stick this pin down the intersection, voila, it came out perfectly in that intersection. And you can always pull this up and look. That pin is going right between both pieces of that fabric, which is exactly where you want it. So we'll put a clip right here. Now, I believe last time I had you putting some pins in down here to hold this together. I recently was working on one that had a lot more little bitty pieces. So I started putting my magic pins up here a little bit closer to the top. So I've got that little horizontal pin going in there. And you guys might say, man, Deb, that's overkill. It's a lot, definitely so. But I want to make sure that all my hard work isn't in vain. And I want all these points to line up super well. So down here, I'm just going to put one of these wonderful magic clips and hold that in place there. Okay. So none of this stuff should be shifting. This right here really is a lot of overkill, but I do like to have these pins holding this in place. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove all of these pins, the ones that were sticking vertically. I still have my clips in place. And I've got these pins holding the two pieces together, so hopefully it doesn't shift. And I'm going to take it over to my machine, and we're going to start sewing right here at the edge where those two pieces meet. So you might want to hold your thread so it doesn't get tangled up underneath. We're going to go down the white line and then all the way down this black line, coming off the white line at the bottom. So let's do that. Oops, forgot this little pin here. All right, so we are ready. We'll hold that thread back so it doesn't bunch up. And then let's go down that one. When you go to pull your clips out, when you get close to a clip,
It's probably a good idea just to pause and raise up the clip and pull it back instead of just flinging it back. This happened in class last week as well. Everything was pinned up, lined perfectly, but when she finished sewing, it wasn't lined up all the way perfectly. You guys are just going to have that in my face. So don't just like throw them off super quickly. I sometimes tend to do that too, but make sure you're not just pulling them off, you're lifting them so that they're not grabbing on the fabric when you slide them back. All right, so let's continue down that line. When you get to the intersections, you can go really slow. And notice I'm coming up on a pin, and my foot is actually going right over that magic pin. It's so flat and smooth. It's not hurting anything at all. It's not messing anything up. Just go slowly and be really careful, and it will be great. If it is in the way, you can always stop and pull the pin out, of course. And then I'm going to move this guy a tad and finish right off in. All right, flip those threads. I hope you were able to see that and I wasn't in your way. So now I've sewn all the way down this line. Right, let's hold our breath. It's usually what I do. Turn it over and see. Oh, look, that couldn't be more perfect. That is all the way on that line. Perfect intersections at both ends. Yay! That's why adding all these pins and clips are worth it. Worth it, worth it. So now we can open that up and look at that point. Oh, that's so pretty. And depending upon how you iron it, if you iron it this way, or you iron it this way, or you iron it open, you may have a different look and feel. So this looks like it was going to line up perfectly if I iron that open. So that's probably what I'm going to do. But before we press this and iron it open, we want to remove the seam allowance inside, or the paper inside the seam allowance, not the seam allowance itself, but all these little bits of seam allowance paper. The reason why we don't want to leave that in, we are going to remove all of our paper before we quilt it anyway. But when we're pressing these seams to one side or open or however you end up pressing them, if you've got paper underneath there, it's going to, one, make it harder to remove later. And two, it's just going to be adding quite a bit of bulk. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to add any bulk. It's got enough bulk all on its own. Okay, so we're ripping all of that out. Usually you can get it out just by scratching it with your fingers or grabbing a little bit better hold of it. But if you need to get some tweezers, you can get some tweezers and pull the rest of that off, which is what I'm going to do. And remember, we were sewing at tiny little stitch, right? So we had a really tiny stitch. I sew at a 1.3. You can sew anywhere between a 1.3 and a 1.7. So being able to pull out all of this paper and not pull out our seams is huge. Okay, so we've got our seam paper ripped out on both sides. So now we're ready to go and press this guy. I'm going to press mine open. And I'm just going to use this little pressing bar. If you have something like this, there are all kinds of different ones. I don't see. Oh, yeah, there's my other one. So this is a woolly pressing bar, also works as a clapper. This one is the strip stick, which is what I used all the time initially. Either one of them are going to work the same. You're going to lay your piece over that bar, and both of these are hard. This one just happens to have a wool mat, helps with that seam. And if you're pressing to one way, super easy to press. But if you're pressing open, this bar just allows you to get in there and really give that a nice, good press. What you want to be careful of if you're doing something like this, when you get to these seams, you want to open those up, but don't pull really, really hard. I mean, I could pull this really, really hard and stretch it over either one of these bars. And then what's going to happen is when I iron it, it's going to show my thread peeking through on the other side. And you don't want that. You don't want any thread peeking through on the other side. So lay it down, press it, give it. If you've got this Euro steam iron that I have, you can give it a nice, really good steam. I just turned mine on, so it's not going to steam just yet. We'll let it warm up and then I'll show you how that is going to work. And then you can see when you turn it over, I'll press it more. It's not pressed well enough. I want to steam it. I want to make it nice and flat. When you turn it over, it'll be a nice, beautiful little point right there in the middle where all those pieces meet together. And that's exactly what you want. Okay, so let me keep this here so I'll remember when the iron is all nice and heated that I want to make sure I press that again and give it a couple shots of steam so it'll lay nice and flat. Now, later in our time together, I will give you some other tips and tricks for getting your seams nice and thin. There's lots of other products that people use, and I'll share some of those with you. These are my favorite, the woolly pressing mat, the strip stick, and my Euro steam iron with a lot of steam because I've already starched my fabric and I use that steam. It works really well to get nice, pretty flat blocks. And I do iron after after every one of my pieces I'm adding to a segment and after every segments that I've sewn together. So ironing all along the way, even though it's a pain, is really very helpful to get your blocks nice and crisp. All right, my iron is heated up. You can see the steam coming out of it. So I'm just going to lay this here, open that seam, and I just give it lots of little steam there, lots of steam. Nice and steamed. It's really, really flat. I ran over that a little too much there. Let me flatten that down. And then you can see, voila, beautiful block. Pieces are perfect. Looks super good. All right, so I'm going to put my piece back in the diagram where it was. So B1 and BC were here. I'm going to look at my next instructions. My instructions say to take this block, BC, these two pieces joined together, and add it to D right down here. So when we look at that, we know the endpoints are going to be important, but I can also see there's an intersection here that will line up with this intersection, and those are going to be really important. So that's where I'm going to start placing my pins. Okay, but I'm going to do this one a little differently than taking advantage of the magic white lines. So while I love to take advantage of those, it's super helpful to know that I'm in the exact right place. Sometimes I want a little extra to hold on to on my piece. So I don't always trim my blocks. And I'll just be honest, sometimes it's kind of like a good hair day and a bad hair day. Sometimes I can do this without trimming my blocks initially, and it's beautiful. And other times it just seems kind of clunky. So find what works for you. And if it's not working for you at that moment, change it up. Try something a little bit different. So we are still going to match these exact same points. We're just going to lose the ability to know what these magic white lines do and have them help us line up the piece underneath. So I'm going to take these two pieces. We're going to make them kiss together again. And I'm going to start in this middle piece. Okay. Again, I can't line up with these pieces because this top piece has not been trimmed. So we just lose those magic white lines, but we're still putting our pin in the exact same point right there between the two pieces. And then we're going to line it up in between these two pieces on the actual seam allowance. And that looks pretty good. Normally, let me move that out of the way. Normally, I will take advantage of my light board and let me make it brighter. Might be hard for you guys to see for a second, but when I am holding this on the light board, I can see the shadow of where that seam allowance goes. Oops, my pin came out and I was spot on right in it. Okay, so that's the advantage of having a light board. You can also hold it up to a light. If I were to hold it up to this light here, I could see, do I have it in the right place? But again, we're putting that right in between where those two pieces match on the seam line underneath. Okay, so it looks like we've got it pretty good. So I can push that together and make sure it's nice and straight. My pin is nice and straight, and put a pin or a clip, to hold that in place. And I'm going to be a little overly pin happy again, because I would rather take a little extra time and be overly pin happy and get this lined up perfectly than to not get it lined up correctly. And my points not matched and I got to rip it out. That actually needs a smidgen down. Normally my light box is helping me with all of this, but it makes it harder for you guys to see. All right, so we've got that one pinned. I'm going to put one in this corner, and when I put it here in this corner, it's going to come out right here where those three pieces come together. Okay, so I can place it first in the correct place, and then I know exactly where it's going to go. It's going to go right in that corner. I can smash it in there and look perfect in the exact right place. So I'm going to put a little clip there, hold that together, and we're going to go back and go from the middle out again. Same thing. I have a feeling that one's not going to be quite right. Pretty close, but I don't like pretty close. I like it right on. So now I need to go right in the middle of those two. All right, so right on that seam line. Perfect. I'm going to put a little clip there. And then this corner right here, this is going to be an easy one to line up because we know we're putting it in, but where those two white lines meet, in between the two pieces of fabric. My eyes, y'all. Don't get old. It's no fun. All right, and then I'm going to put it between those two pieces on the same intersection underneath. All right, so that looks perfect. And that's the side I'm going to start with. And get another regular clip just to hold it for the time being, nice and straight. And again, we're going to do more effort than some people probably are willing to do. And I can go ahead and take this pin out and just use it to put in here. All right, so I've got those horizontal pins in. I can go ahead and take these guys out. And we're still sewing on the same line. We are still starting down here on this white line, meeting up with the black line and going all the way off on the white line. So let me take it over here and see how it lines up. All right, so I'm going to start right here on this white line. Get lined up really well. And I'm just going to sew straight down, stopping to remove my clips. And I think I got a little bit off the line on this end. I did. You can see that kind of a tiny bit. Let's turn over and see what it looks like. Doesn't look bad from this side. So instead of ripping that out and redoing it, I'm first going to look at it and see, does it pass inspection? So if you open it up, perfect. Those points are still meeting up pretty snazzy. And depending upon which way I fold this back, one way looks a little bit better aligned than the others. That point meets up perfectly, and that point meets up perfectly. So we're good. I'm going to rip out this paper. And last time after I ripped out paper, I was ready to iron. But since I haven't trimmed all of my pieces, this time we're going to want to trim this down to 1/4 of an inch before we sew it. My pin case is in my trash can. All right, so before I iron this open, I want to trim off this extra bit of fabric here. Trim that down, and then you can decide, do you want to press it one way or the other, or do you want to press it open? I think actually pressing it this way, makes those points look a little bit crisper. So that's what I'm going to do, is press it that way. Pressing open works too. So whichever way works best for you to get the look of those seams, of those joins that you want, go ahead and press that. Right, and there is A, B, C, and D. All right, so if I put that back in my diagram, I can see I have B, C, D all connected. So I have done B, C to D. So my next step would be B, C, D to E. And then we're going to add A to all of that. So we're going to put these two pieces together. These are our critical intersections here. And then when we've got that together and we go to put this one, this right here is going to be a really critical intersection. And usually this will be a bigger piece. This is smaller. I usually try to put my smaller piece on top. So I would be working with it, putting my pins in from this side so that they're on top. All right, so go ahead and finish up B1, and then we'll take a look at the layout for B2. All right, I finished block, what is this, B1. So B1 is ready, and I know it may not look super crisp and clean like this side here. We already trimmed up that piece, but I didn't trim up all of my other pieces. So it still was kind of rough around the edges, but this is B1. So now let's get all of our parts and pieces for B2 and let's lay that out. So we're just going to put it here on this board and we're going to look at our design, our layout here. Let me move that where you guys can see. So A is up here in the corner and then B is underneath. And I'm just going to follow this down. A, B, C. I already had these in A, B, C order. Kind of makes it a little bit easier. There's D. E goes next to that. F goes next to that. G is down here in the bottom. All right. And then I'm going to start back up here at the top. H is up here next to A. Then we have this big piece of I. We have J here. Then we have K and we have L. So look at your piece, your layout, see if yours is laid out that exact same way. Make sure you can read all of the letters, everything's positioned in the correct way. And then now we just got to put all these pieces together. So we've got 11 steps. We're going to start with B to C. So that's right here, B to C. These 2 points are going to meet up. This is going to meet up and this is going to meet up. So I'm going to let you put block B together and then we'll come back and we'll talk about putting both our blocks together. So choose whatever way works best for you. If you want to take advantage of these white lines, then go right ahead and trim down your blocks. If you want a little extra to hang on to, then go ahead and leave them like this. Okay, so there's pros and cons to both ways. Decide how you want to do it, and let's put that block together according to these instructions. So if it's more comfortable for you, you can check it off after each one. Put a little sticky note and kind of move it down the page as you're going along. But follow these steps exactly, and you'll have this block all put together. All right, well, welcome back. I finished block 2. Did you get yours finished? Here it is. I haven't trimmed the corners, the edges yet, because I'm going to put them together this way instead of trimming them. But I love it. And right now you're probably looking at it going, it's just a bunch of triangles. But all those triangles are going to come together and make one beautiful, beautiful starry night. All right. So you can see here's B2. I do want to point out one thing that I did on this seam right here where we had to join this big piece B to I to this KJ unit over here. When I finished, and here's the seam right here. When I finished, these points lined up perfectly, and these points lined up perfectly, and they really wanted to be pressed to the left. So I pressed those to the left. But if we look down here, look at this point. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces of fabric coming together. And that's a lot of pieces of fabric in one spot. And it really didn't want to fold the same way as the rest of that line did. So what I ended up doing is I folded and ironed this way and it worked beautifully. You can see some of my seams are ironed open, some are to one side, some are to the other side. But down here, this had a lot of points and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on this side and only 3 over here. It really wanted to fold the other way. But if I folded these seams the other way, they didn't match up 100% perfectly. But folding them this way, they are perfect. So what I did is I just cut a little slit right here in my piece. So you can see this was the seam. We're pretending before this piece was sewn on. I cut a little slit right here and I just pressed this that way.
It laid perfectly fine that way. The seam did not have to be laid open. It actually feels nice and thin being pushed over this way and leaving the rest of these seams going to the left and this little portion going to the right. And that made that block line up really well. And it also made it nice and smooth. Now, if you do something like this, be careful that you don't clip into your seam because then you're going to have a hole in the quilt. Okay, so hopefully little tips like that will help you, and I'll try to give you some more as we go along through this whole process. So now we are ready to put B2 together with B1. And I'm going to do mine by looking at the finished quilt side. So this is my finished quilt side here. You can see B2 that I just completed is right here on the left. So I'm going to put that one on the left, and my B1, which is the block I finished recently, is going to go right here. And you can see if I move those that I have these lined up the correct way and in the right order. Okay, so when we are lining them up on the quilt side, it's always the smaller number on the right. And then it goes to the larger number. So we have B1 on the right, B2 on the left. And now we're just going to fold these over, let them kiss. You can kind of see where these colors are going to match up here. And it's going to be so beautiful. So I'm going to fold it over. I'm going to pin in all the important spots. So here, 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 and on both ends, I'm going to just pin like crazy. And then put my clips and my horizontal pin so I can match this up. And then I'm going to take it over this machine and sew it. So you pause the video and you go do that too. And I'll meet you right back here. I finished putting my two blocks, B1 and B2 together. And here's what it looks like. How did you do? I hope you were successful too. So now we have month 1 and month 2 both completed. So let's talk about how we start putting our completed months together. If we look at the instructions that came with your kit, you've got this general assembly instruction guide. It gets back on page 18 to talking about your final quilt assembly. But our quilt is a little different than this. We only have 16 blocks instead of a full 64 like the larger size kits. And our quilt is turned this way. So instead of using this assembly guide, we're still going to put it all together the same way. I'm just going to show you what that looks like on our full quilt layout from month 1. And we're looking at the finished quilt side. So on month 1, we did A1 and A2. This month we did B1 and B2. So we've got these 4 completed. And the way we put these together is we always put them in groups of 2. So we've already put month 1 together, month 2 together. Now we're going to put things together in quadrants. So our first 4 blocks that we've already done together are going to be put together in this first quadrant right here. So we're going to take our month 1 and we're going to lay that out. You can see here that the sun, this bright orange, is down here at the bottom and we're on the left side. And then we're going to take our month 2 that we just completed and we're going to put that on top or right underneath it. And you can tell that these colors are going to match up. Now, they don't look like they're going to match up here because this block is nice and trimmed. This block has not been nice and trimmed. Plus, we're going to have that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So it's not going to ever really look like it's going together until it goes together. But you can tell by looking at this that this, I guess, what is this? A star, Starry Night is going to go together. These pieces here are going together. So now we really just put this together just like we've been putting together all of our units, all of our segments, and then putting together all of our blocks. We're going to do this the same way. So we're going to make sure these fold down over each other and that they are kissing. And this seam in the middle right here that I just folded down, this is the seam I want to pin. So I'm just going to put a few clips to know that's the side of this that I'm going to pin together, put my clips, my pins all the way down. And then when it opens up, when I've got it pinned well, I've got these a little crooked, so let me move it just so it'll look a little bit better for you. When I open that up, I can see, yes, I've got all of this going the right way. Okay. So that just helps me know when I go to pick it up and then move it closer to put my pens and everything in that I'm pinning on the right side and sewing the right side. I would hate to sew this other side together and open it up and it be wrong. And believe me, that has happened. We get emails all the time where people have made different kind of mistakes and we help them out. And I've seen that one once before, only once, but so I just put my clips here just so I know this is the side I'm pinning together and sewing on. So you're gonna put pins in all of these intersections here, starting at the end. All of these little intersections where they meet is where you're going to want to keep putting pins and clips all the way down so that you get this nice and secure. Now, sometimes I will do half of it and double check and make sure it's good and then do the other half. Other people have told me they like to baste all the way down first or right inside their seam allowance or so that they can tell if they've got it lined up correctly. And then if they do, sew it together. If you need that extra assurance, no problem at all. Go ahead and baste it once you get it pinned. Open it up, see what it looks like, or just do a really, really good job pinning and clipping and holding this nice and secure as you go along, and it's going to be beautiful. So in just a moment, I'm going to do that. But I want to go back to talking about putting the rest of these together. So next month, here they are. I have already done month 3 because if you remember my introduction, I told you that I've only done the blocks I tested. Well, these are my blocks I tested. So this is going to be what month 3 is going to look like next week. So when you get your kit next week, this is what you're going to make. And we do have a few new colors here. So some of these darker colors that you're going to see here and on the edges, we haven't had yet. So we're going to be introduced to a few more pieces of fabric that we haven't had before. So next month 3 is going to be A3 and A4. And I just showed you what that looks like. So that's what we're going to do together next week. Now, this is very similar to what we've been doing so far. This one, month 2, we had some pretty big pieces here, but it started getting smaller right here. This is going to be very similar next month. We've got some rather large pieces, but we start to get into some of the smaller pieces. So we've got 2 more months here, month 3 and month 4, where things are going to go along smoothly, kind of like they have been going. And we're dealing with some small pieces, but nothing like way down here. You see all those teeny pieces? Don't worry. By the time we get to the last 2 months, you guys are going to be an expert and you're going to have it all figured out by then. I have no doubt. So that's what we'll be working on next week. So let's continue on talking about how you would finish putting this whole thing together. So we're always doing in blocks of 2. So we would do this 2, then these 2, and then we're going to do blocks of 4. So we'll do these 4 that we're about to do, these 4, these 4, these 4. And so then we're going to have 4 quadrants of block pieces. So then we will join them together we will put together 8, and we will put together 8. And then we will have one long seam right here, right down the middle. And that is much better. And trying to match up all these tiny, tiny points all along this way, doing it one time instead of waiting and doing it on every single row as you are building this. So we deal with smaller seams when we put together in 2, then 4, then 8, then 16. So just to give you a look ahead at what we'll be doing. So now I'm going to pin together my month 1 and month 2. I'm going to stitch it together, hold my breath, and hope I get it all pinned out really well. And I'll bring it back and show you what it looks like. All right, you did it. You completed month 1 and 2 of Starry Night. It looks beautiful. I love it. All that's left to do now is clean up our mess. I'm so thankful you're joining me along the way. Hopefully you maybe tried out something new this time, learned a few new things. At least you had lots of extra practice in putting these beautiful blocks together. And you are now 1/4 of the way done with your Starry Night kit. I look forward to seeing you next month. Until then, happy sewing and stay legit.